Hi, I'm Napoleon Bell, and I am in the presence, I say, of greatness, right? I'm just so excited to hear their stories from members of the Thursday Noon Lunch Club. And this club has been around for for just about 80 years. But there's so much history that is on each side of me that we're here to talk about not only the Thursday Noon Lunch Club, but also the history here in Columbus, Ohio, and even beyond. So I'm just so excited. So let me first start off, though, with introducing from my right, your left. First, we have Miss Ann B. Walker. And I'm sure everyone knows Miss Ann B. Walker from all the media and everything that she's been doing in Central Ohio. Next to her, we have Miss Leela Boykin. She's a longtime resident and community advocate, so if there's something going on, she knows about it. Then to my left, your right, Mr. Mike Roberts. He's also been engaged in community. I think that you're going to see from this group that it's all about community and making things better here in Central Ohio. And then last but not least, Mr. Tom Dillard, who has also been in the community, but I think after this conversation, you're really going to be able to understand why we have all of them here and why they have all been involved, and not only the Thursday Noon Lunch Club, but also involved in just Central Ohio and the things that are going on that really impact the communities here locally. So first, let me start off with this, and we're just going to kind of go around the room and just chime in when you want. But and thinking about the Thursday Noon Lunch Club, right? How did that 80 years ago? 80 years ago. How did that start? How and why did it start?
You want to see me?
Sure.
Well, actually, it was started by the director of the Spring Street YMCA and the director of recreation, which was Claude Willis.
Okay.
And the director of the Y was Chester Morse. And it was a group of black businessmen
Okay.
that, had issues with what was going on in the black community, the kinds of things that they advocated for. And it just continued and continued and continued. So, I mean, it's never been an organization that really pressed any issues, but they collectively would come together every Thursday at noon, and they started by bringing their own lunch in a brown bag, right?
Oh, okay.
So as it progressed, they had a caterer. One of the members started catering, and then they hired a caterer who was just until 2 years ago, still our caterer, and she was the caterer for like 30 years, Miss Vicky.
Oh my goodness.
And she did an excellent job. So, what we do now is that we have guest speakers from different organizations, from the city, from the school board, and, corporate execs that come in and answer questions, and we hash them over.
Yeah.
You're part of that. You see that.
I have seen that, and I'm a proud member of the Thursday Noon Lunch Club. And so, but who started it? Who were the founding members?
Claude Willis was the founding member.
Okay, so there's one
and Chester Morse.
And Chester Morse.
Right.
Okay.
The other thing to add to that, in 1943, there were other men's organizations around that were white.
Oh, okay.
Kiwanis, Rotary,
Yeah.
etc. And you couldn't join those. African American members could not join those. And as you see a lot of times in our history, when they don't let us in, we make our own.
Okay.
And so that's pretty much what the Thursday Noon Club was. And there's some other clubs like that too, where men got together and organized.
Okay. Now you talk about the men getting together, but when did the women get to be a part of the club?
Actually, women started coming to the club about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Leila was one of the first female members of the Thursday Noon Club, and Mrs. Moman, I think she was the very first.
Oh, wow.
She
Okay.
is also the wife of Mr. Moman, his name Russell Moman.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Russell has been a member for like 15 or 16 years.
Yeah. Now, Miss at the other end here, Miss Ann Walker, you know, she's come several times when I've been there. You know, I think she knows a little something something.
I used to come regularly, and particularly after I retired, because it gave me an opportunity to keep informed about what was going on in the community. And that has always been very important to me. And then from personal reasons, I had to drop out, and now I'm back.
Okay. All right. Well, glad to have you back, but it's always an important voice to have in the conversation. Now, speaking of those conversations, though, I know that I've been there and I've experienced some of the conversations you have. There are times when you know you really have a really good feisty conversation. So, what is you know the you know when over the years, what are those? What's the topics? What is talked about or and there's you know during those conversations.
Clearly, some of the topics are issues in the community. Integration, right? When the schools started busing, that was a topic we talked about.
Well, let me dig down into that. So how did that? Was it the topics to be able to make a change, or was this a piece or strategy session? What was talked about?
What generally happens in the club is a topic will come up, people have an interest in it, and the members themselves will then a member themselves will take that topic on and pursue it. And so we'll talk of a range of different things. Most recent one is the Twin Towers over in
Sawyer.
Sawyer. And some of the members then took on themselves to provide food and comfort for those people. Now the club doesn't do it as a whole, but the members will take action and go do different kinds of projects.
Well,
and Napoleon, my whole reaction having joined like 4 years ago, and being a transplant from Cleveland, and the Cleveland City Club is the oldest community group that addresses community issues. And I thought, okay, looking at some of the issues that Cleveland has addressed, and they travel around the city, excuse me, talking to community people to find out, you know, what are you concerned about? And that becomes, you know, part of the discussion for them. But I think the beauty of the Thursday Noon Club is that so many of us are involved in different organizations throughout the city. And when we bring up topics, we get input from the other members about some possibilities and things that we could do in terms of influencing the organizations that we belong to regarding that issue or those issues. And I think therein lies the strength of the Thursday Noon Luncheon Club.
Churches were the body that hosted groups so that they had an opportunity to talk about what was going on and what could be done. And then there was a feeling that the churches were becoming too political. So I think out of that inadvertently grew the Thursday Club and other organizations that exist like that.
Okay.
So like Ms. Walker said, that you know churches were involved back in the beginning of the inception of the Thursday Noon Club, and what happened is that because they were a nonprofit, they were threatened to have their nonprofit status taken away, and so a lot of the people that were involved in churches throughout the community, they stopped coming, but the club went on. And one of the things that really happened back then was that we had people who were politically involved that were trying to get people elected to city council and other city positions, county positions. And it took quite a while before those things started to materialize. And you know, now what we do is that we talk about these things, but we haven't become the force of advocacy for the community as a whole yet. But as we grow and as we move, I think that is something that's going to be in the near future.
Yeah.
And I think we understand the importance of legacy. We're part of the legacy of the gentleman who formed the club, in 1943, and we have brought the Thursday Luncheon Club to a certain level. How effective have you been? Where's your strength as an individual as you deal with other people? And it really does make a difference when people know that you belong to the Thursday Luncheon Club, but you're speaking on an issue that's important to the community. We're looking now at younger people to be our legacy.
Right.
Life has changed, society has changed, and unfortunately, we're re-looking at some of the same things that we looked at back in the 50s. And, I find it hard to believe that we're concerned about voting rights.
Yeah.
But that's, we'll address that too.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about it was mentioned of integration and all that impact. Let's talk about how did that impact the city or the county or this region. How did those in the Thursday Noon Luncheon Club, but just you yourselves, what was the impact here?
Well, I think some of the guys, like Mike's father, was a businessman, right? And many of the folks were professionals or business folks, and through the Thursday Club, they were able to push. In other words, meet people, meet the people on the other side, meet white folks, okay, who had opportunities, and begin to put forth, okay, opportunities, for folks to work. It opened slowly as the whole East Side opened, right after the
The freeway?
after the freeway, and people began to seek more opportunities. So the Thursday Club was a place for courage. Guys would get ideas about, hey man, I know so and such. Let me meet with them and see what happens. So it really became like a fountainhead, if you would say, what opens up opportunities for folks through networking,
Yes.
which
Right.
is a strength for the African American community.
I think some of that was, they saw some of those men that were meeting back in those days when I was just maybe a teenager or something. The things that was happening to the establishment and the infrastructure of the black community, that businesses started to disappear. And, for a number of years, we had to stand on the East Market, and all of a sudden the East Market was gone. And as things passed and the North Market came about, now you've got a new East Market over in what used to be the bus barn.
Yeah, right.
That
Oh, okay.
that
Barn. Yeah.
they wouldn't let the lady that owned that develop it
Yeah.
for some reason, because the powers that be wanted something different than what she wanted to do. And Pondexter Village is a perfect example. The Thursday Club got involved in speaking to the engineers and the architects and things that were planning on demolishing. And there were plans that we had drawn up that we submitted to the engineers, and they didn't accept them, and they continued to demolish them. And that's how the Pondexter Foundation is now about.
Okay.
Rita Smith started this movement to save two of the buildings, and now we're working on the museum and the Cultural Learning Center that is standing now. Tom and I are both on the board of the Pondexter Foundation, but those are the kinds of things that in the beginning, the members and the men that were organized with the Thursday Club were trying to help us progress. And now when you go down Mount Vernon and Long Street, you see the progression.
Well, so you'd mentioned the freeway coming through and for those who might not understand the significance of the freeway coming through, let's talk about that and why it happened. And because we're talking about integration and segregation, why did that happen, and what was its impact on the community? Anybody?
Well, first of all, the freeway that started at Sandusky Sandusky Boulevard or Sandusky Street that came around off of Broad Street and is now 71 North. Was designed first to go through the east side and go through Bexley.
Yep.
But because of the establishment, they switched it over and they brought it through. They wiped out
Yep.
probably a third of the east side, the lower east side community when that freeway went through there.
Wait a minute. Bexley objected. So once they objected, they weren't going through. But they came through, and I'm saying this because it's where I lived. And I didn't think of living in the lower side. But they came through. And Bill Brooks was my attorney when I refused to sell. And he said, either sell Ann or the city will take it. But they went through that section of where blacks live, Jefferson, Hamilton,
Right.
in the Fort Hays area, because it was cheaper.
Buckingham.
The city could get that land and that property at a reduced rate.
Right.
And if you look at what is happening around the country, you find it happens in almost every city.
That's correct.
Where they go through where the less wealthy areas, let's say it like that, you know.
Right.
But and I still resent it. Look how long ago that was.
So you didn't even have a choice whether to.
There was no.
It was like it's
Once-
coming through.
Once they decided that they were going straight through and close off Mount Vernon Avenue at Cleveland,
Right.
then they took all the property in that area.
That's right.
So what did that do then to Mount Vernon Plaza and that Mount Vernon area? What did
It
that?
destroyed the area. It had been a very when I was a child growing up, it was a very thriving area. You had all the businesses there, and so once the city took the property for a highway, then we had to look for other places to purchase and to move and to rebuild the businesses that we once had. It was a self-contained community originally, but that no longer exists. 'Cause
So that
it's still
pushed
a
everybody
problem.
to have to.
Beg pardon?
So that pushed everybody to have to kind of go out and kind of.
Very definitely.
Okay.
Well,
And it's
so-
still a problem.
you know, we have this issue across the country that African American communities that are economically thriving because of how they put things together. Okay, and it's all about economics. You know, how do we get that money? You know, and that's how my friends and I who came to Ohio State during the Civil Rights Movement saw it. It's like, what you really want is the money that's contained here. And the way to get it, okay, is to build a highway through it. And you take things like Flytown. It took one of my late uncles who played in a band that backed up Billie Holiday on his way back to Cleveland. They used to stop here in Columbus. And it was at Jack and Benny's downtown. Is that? Yeah. So they used to eat at Jack and Benny's, have a little set, you know, impromptu set, and then go back to Cleveland. But he would tell me about how things were changing during the years that they were traveling, coming back to that same place. And it was all about the economics. Okay, you look at what happened to Tulsa. Okay, now we got the other issue about someone, you know, being flirted with, but really, you know, you destroy an entire city, the economy. So that's how we saw it. But the good side of that was people like, excuse me, Mr. Otto Beatty Sr. and Charlie Seward, Earl Sherrod, some attorneys, helped us to understand how we needed to approach the issues that we're now facing. What happened at Poindexter? What happened on the Near East Side? What happened to the economic structure on the Near East Side?
Yeah, but it just didn't happen at Poindexter in the city of Columbus.
Yeah.
It was a rampant move. It's like when she mentioned Flytown. the freeway took away part of that establishment. There were underprivileged, mostly black families that were living, and a lot of them moved to the Near East Side or to Berwick or to Eastgate or the Hilltop, someplace like that. But what then happened is that those homes that were moderately priced were renovated by different construction companies, and those houses that sold for 45, 55, 6,500 back in the days now are 350, 400,000.
That's right.
And they call it Victorian Village, but that was Flytown.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, so we had this dramatic change. And what were the years around that when the 71 come through? Was that in
That was probably in the 60s, 1959, 60, 61.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Early.
59, 60.
Okay. So prior to that, and we have a large concentration of Black Americans that lived in this area, and there was a thriving community with businesses. What were the places that you remember that you would go to either to eat or to buy food or go to the movies? I hear so much about the movies and things. What were the places to go?
You know, the East Side at that time had 4 theaters. You had the Lincoln, the Empress, the Cameo, and the Pythian.
Okay.
Those were all in the East Side community.
Okay.
They're all gone now. So, and I remember as a kid, about 13, 14 years old, going down to the Palace with a group of guys from the Hilltop. And they told us we couldn't sit on the first floor. We had to go to the balcony. Well, we went home and told our parents that, we couldn't sit where we wanted to. We had to sit in the balcony. They didn't like that. So the following weekend, there were 4 fathers and about 5 kids from those fathers that went, and we sat on the first floor, and the usher came down. They said, "We're not moving," So that kind of broke that chain, because at that time the Palace was on the south side of Broad Street, and the RKO was right across the street, the RKO Grand.
Right.
And so then, as kids and teenagers, we could go and we could sit anywhere in the theaters that we wanted.
Oh, wow.
And that's where we learned the strategies. To go back up at Ohio State and really talk to people and not yell and scream at them. Don't cuss them out, because they won't. They'll shut you down. And we used to have these role plays with Mr. Beatty and the Chesapeake, and those gentlemen who understood what we were trying to do, wanted us to be successful, but knew that we were using our tools the wrong way to get there. And so they helped us. And we were allowed to go to the 502, Larry's Up and Down, all the jazz entertainment places, being our sophisticated selves from, urban communities around the country. And they would not allow us to drink. And they didn't want to see any IDs, because they said, "We know you guys all have fake IDs. So, you can get some food and no drinks."
Right.
But just learned a lot from people who had suffered the economic downturn, deliberate downturn, but still had enough wherewithal and concern for us, that generation coming after them, to say, "Here's some things that you can do to make things better."
Right.
So,
Well, let me pose this question to Ms. Walker. Or go ahead. What were you going to say?
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because you were broke the ceiling, the glass, in media. Tell us about that. I mean, you were I can't remember what channel and all of that, but you had your own shows and everything.
Well, just let me say this to Mike.
Okay.
Mike, I was a freshman in college when my twin brother called me and said, "Guess what? We can sit anywhere we want to in the Palace."
That was big news.
yes.
Yeah, I was about
Yes.
13 or 14 years old. She
Yeah.
was a freshman in college, right?
in Columbus,
Okay.
black people came to Columbus to work as professionals. For instance, there was a hospital at 17th and Long, and Dr. Method had to go south to find staff, nurses, technicians, etc. In the South, they had individual schools, and as many could enroll that could afford it. In the North, the schools would only accept, for Ohio State, for instance, would only accept 2 black students in the professional schools.
Right.
Oh,
And
wow.
if they have changed, it's just recently.
That's right.
Because my twin brother
Wow.
had tenure at Ohio State and worked there for 23 years in the on the medical staff, medical faculty. And I kept saying to him, "You've got an obligation to help change this." You know, most communities all across the country, black communities, had a newspaper. And that newspaper covered whatever was happening in the black community.
Correct.
If you had blacks working for the dailies, the white papers, then they were serving as typists, or they were serving as janitors. In in 1959, I was asked, in 1949, a friend of mine who was editor of the Ohio Sentinel said, "Ann, I need some help. Would you write an article for me?" And I said, "What kind of article?" And he said, editorial. I said, "Okay, that's easy to do." But it really isn't easy to do, because the average person speaks 26 words in 10 minutes. And 26 words, yeah. And so it means each word has to be a telling word. But I agreed to do it. You mentioned Otto Beatty. Otto Beatty and his family moved here from Kansas,
Right.
and he opened up a restaurant. But in addition to that, he wanted a newspaper.
Yes.
So Otto Beatty and Otto Beatty Sr., the lawyer,
L.P. Henderson?
who?
L.P. Henderson?
No, it wasn't LP. But at any rate, there were 3 people who decided that they would have a newspaper, and so they underwrote the cost of the Sentinel. Jack Coles had the Ohio State News,
Right.
and he was a politician, so his paper was by and large political. Well, when I started doing editorials and the word got out, well, Ann Walker works for the Ohio Sentinel, then organizations would say, well, Ann, could you put something in the paper about our activity? And so the newspaper grew. You had a young man who wanted to be in broadcasting, and Eddie Saunders bought time at the ABC station that he sold. You know, he wasn't on the staff, but he bought the time that he sold. And people thought, oh, he's a broadcaster. And he would bring through Columbus the gospel singers and had them appear on this program and advertise that they were going to be at a certain church at a certain time. One day I received a call from a friend, and I say a friend because both of us were active in the civil rights movement. I was a member of CORE. The one group, you know this what's the other black group that besides CORE, NAACP? The young men started this program, and I would let them meet because my nephew was a part of it. I would let them meet in the basement of my home. Well, I knew as long as they met in the basement of my home, and I'm
Okay.
working for a newspaper, the police won't bother them. The police would drive up and down the street, but they wouldn't bother them. And that worked out satisfactorily until they decided to get their own headquarters, and they got this little shack at Miller and Oak. And once they did, they were always arrested.
Yeah.
You know, they call me, Ann, can you come get us out? That kind of thing.
Well, let me ask you this, because you talk about the Sentinel. Was that related to, or was that the Column Post? Was
No,
okay.
no. The Sentinel
Okay.
was a separate
I
paper
didn't,
altogether.
well, I didn't know whether it became the Column Post.
No.
Yeah, that
Okay, it was before.
it was-
Yes.
Before that.
When the Sentinel, Russell Jackson, who was the editor, became ill.
Right.
And when he became ill, they had to find someone else to run the paper, and so they had Amos Lynch, who had been the advertising director. By that time, I'm writing for any and everything. Anybody who calls, will you cover this? And I said yes. Well, I got this call asking me if I would, and it was from WLW, and the person who asked me wanted to know if I would be willing to would be willing to work for Channel 4. And I said, at some point, how much? And I said, no, I can't afford to work for that, because it was like $85 a week. It was going to cost me more than $85 a week just to put my children, and I had 4 of them, in nursery school. So I said no. But then in 1959, Moy Butler came to me and he said, I need an assistant. He was a director of community services. And he said, I wondered if you would be willing to work. And we talked about it, and he talked about the problems that we possibly would encounter. It wasn't going to be an easy task, but it sounded like fun to me, so I said, and they paid decently.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I told him that Channel 4 had asked me about 4 years ago. One of the reasons they had asked me, Dr. King came to Columbus. He was willing to do an interview, but he said it has to be with a black reporter, and nobody had a black reporter.
Oh,
But
wow.
the
Oh,
Ohio
okay.
Sentinel.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
Yes.
so then, and he was willing to do it at Channel 6. So I agreed to do the interview. Well, there was I knew his wife before she became his wife, because she and my husband had worked together up near Cleveland in a camp. So at any rate, I agreed to go to Channel 4. So I become then the first woman, period, the first woman who's working full-time for broadcasting in a meaningful position. Because the other women who worked in broadcasting worked in film, they were secretaries, that kind of thing. And so Butler, he really schooled me. He just took me in hand because he wanted it to be successful. And I too wanted to be successful because I don't like failure. And so he worked with me and taught me well.
So let me ask you this, and so you broke the glass ceiling definitely there, but you also led on in regards to this interview. So did that interview with
Dr. King?
Yes.
Oh yeah, we did the
Oh,
interview.
yeah. That's kind of a big piece there. She's like, well, by the way, yes, I did. I just
Yeah,
interviewed
well,
him.
yeah,
That's not a problem.
we did the interview, and whenever Coretta would come to Columbus, she would stay at the Neal house, but she would always come out to our house because of the relationship she had with my husband. But nevertheless, that's really how I backed into journalism as a full-time person.
Wow.
Okay,
That's-
yeah.
So let me and I think I'd like to ask Leela a question in regard, because you talked about Ohio State, and during the civil rights movement, I understand that you had I'm not going at Ohio State. Were you were you one of the ones who sat in?
We had a group of students who wanted to do the sit-in. And we had a group of students who were on the speakers committee. And I was on the speakers committee. And we had targeted the graduate chapters of all of the male fraternities. Okay? You know, Phi Beta Kappa and all of them, the ones who had power, who could help us bring about some changes.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did, and that was why, you know, Mr. Beatty and Earl Sherrod and all those men were like, no, you can't yell at them, you know, because they won't hear you, you know. And what you always want to be heard. Don't worry so much about being agreed with. Concern yourself with being heard, because once they hear clearly your position, they'll have to think about it, and that's what they did. And so that's what I did. And as you know, students sat in at the administration building, got arrested and put in jail, and we were still going around doing what we were doing. We had a group of students who talked to the undergraduate fraternities and sororities, because it was a different time for them too, and many of them were upset with their parents, who had not told them the truth about our concerns and what we wanted to do. So they had started to pull away from them. And you probably saw that when Vietnam kicked off, I mean, they just had separated from their parents quite a bit. But yes, my role and function was to talk to people, analyze things. And it really threw me back to some conversations that I'd had with my father. And my father was part of that group, you know, the last hired, you know, the first fired. But you always thought it through and figured out another way to make things better. And so that's what I learned from him. So it was kind of like, oh, well, being at home, even though my father was dead at the time, but those men were saying the same kind of things, like figure it out, you know, figure out how to make it better. And that's pretty much how I have defined myself through that whole civil rights movement and today.
The times that I'm hearing that you grew up in, and that when Columbus was going through all of this, it seems like, you know, that happened then, but also there's a lot of change even going on now.
One way to understand Columbus history well is to look at it in 10-year increments, from 1910 to today. And one way that I think the significant situation was in the 30s. That was before the Great Migration. But the 30s at OSU was significant. That was the era of Jesse Owens. That was the era.
Who could not live on the east side.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, no, he lived on the hilltop.
He lived on the street I grew up on.
And then he lived all over on 11th Avenue.
Right.
And Jesse Owens could not attend OSU, could not live on campus.
That's right.
It's the era of Adam
wow.
Bishop. It's the era of Alberta Turner.
Yes.
It's the era of Inez Curtis. And what happened was a lot of these people came from smaller communities,
Yes, they did.
rural communities, where black folks had migrated during slavery days into Chillicothe, Circleville, Renville, right?
Jackson.
Jackson
Right.
lived there. And what happened? These were farmers who were raising kids and wanted their kids to go to college.
Yep.
And so they sent them to OSU. Real quick, my grandfather in Marietta walked down the street to see the president of Marietta College to see if his daughter, Constance Nichols, could attend college there. That evening, the president walked up to see Grandpa at 807 Front Street and told him they didn't accept colored girls. Well, that was, they would tell you.
Right.
Yep.
So, and so Grandpa sent Aunt Jean, Constance Nichols, to the Ohio State University, right? Graduates 1932 with honors.
Yeah, yeah.
Not living on campus. The house was on, help me, Ann, on Mike, Long and 20th
Yes.
was the girl, women's YMCA.
Right.
Yeah, YW.
And,
YW.
and let me add the other piece to this. OSU was a fountainhead for black fraternities and sororities,
Yes.
Right.
which really produced a lot of professional folks came out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
the last piece I'll add to that for the what was it for the 40s, just in terms of policy, Truman issued an executive order, and this is the importance of politics, right, Mike, to deseg the military.
Yeah.
For the first time, young black men were going to Curtis Wright and the depot for the first time.
Right.
The east side exploded because now black folks were buying houses on Clifton and Richmond and Woodland
And Long Street.
Long Street.
Oh, yes.
We were buying houses and exploded. Mount Vernon, as a result of that, began to explode too. Then you add to that Poindexter. So if you look at it in terms of years, you can see these significant events that have happened.
That's true.
And here's the important piece that I think is just gorgeous, and how we as a people took advantage of it. How we as a people took advantage of those changes, whether it's civil rights or opening a college or opening Curtis Wright. Wherever there was an opportunity, we took advantage. And I think that's the community we
Well,
feel
we had
lucky
learned
to
from
have today.
them. We had learned
Yes.
from them.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and,
Yeah,
and the
one-
stories that
It's a way to
you
think
heard,
about it.
that next generation of fraternity and sorority people was that still couldn't live on campus, but when it was time for you to pledge and go over, somebody on the Near East Side had a house, and that's where you went over. And that was a big part of
That's
Yeah.
right.
our
Yeah.
history then.
That's
There
right.
was a lot
I
of the
had
black
it.
fraternities
My
had.
husband had a young cousin from Circleville who came to Columbus to go to Ohio State. And
That's
she was
right.
one of the first blacks to live on campus. And Janet is still living. She unfortunately has Alzheimer, but she, has some stories to tell about the what she suffered going through as a freshman living on campus. Yeah.
There were a lot of things that happened back then. I mean, it's just like the black fraternities were, like Leah said, if they had a meeting place, it was in somebody's apartment. That was like, then the Alphas got a house at 1960 Indianola was the first black
That's right.
Yeah.
the first black fraternity to have a house there, and it was right across the street from one of the richest white fraternities at Ohio State was the Tepps.
And then they
right?
let the AKAs meet there for their meetings.
That's
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yes,
So
they did.
but going back and the kind of things that we saw. Let me tell you about the lady sitting down there on the end, Miss Ann Walker. I was probably about that high, could barely talk. But we went to Bethany Presbyterian Church, and I used to just look at her all the time and said, but as time went on, this lady I watched for many, many years and watched what she did for community organizations, her inspiration to a lot of young black folks, particularly folks that were attending Bethany Presbyterian Church. I mean, we go back a long way, and you see the kind of works that come out. It's like Otto's dad opened the Novelty Bar, and that was a place on the east side where we could go and eat up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
That's
Well,
right.
all these things that we had at our disposal or our convenience were wiped out by the kind of gentrification that was in mind of those city fathers that wanted to get rid of this.
Yeah.
So, and now it's happened. So, I mean, it's like, but Lucien Wright is a perfect example that he was one of the first blacks to graduate in education from Ohio State University. And he graduated at undergrad school when he was 19 years old.
That's
Oh,
right.
wow.
So, You know, these are the kind of people that young men like me that are in my era, and I'm not young anymore, but you know, we looked up to these kind of
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
And we had examples to follow. And now the thing that's happening with young folks now, their examples are far and few between, and those who are from my era or era under me are not reaching back. So, you know, that's one of the things that the Pondexter Foundation is trying to do with the Museum and Cultural Learning Center. We're trying to preserve the history
History.
of this community, of not only Pondexter, but the East Side and all of the history that goes into the black community throughout the city of Columbus. When we moved to the Hilltop, we were the second black family on the street.
Okay.
And then it became more predominant. We could only move on 4 streets. It was like, no, 5. Clarendon, Highland, Wheatland, Oakley, and Wayne.
Okay.
That's all the streets that blacks could live in. And you couldn't live on the north side of Broad Street. You always had to be on the south side. So now that's all
So
changed.
split. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's good.
So, you know, the part that I was like, when I got into the labor movement, the things that I saw as far as integration was going, and when busing came along in the city of Columbus, it destroyed communities, in my opinion. And there was not a school in this city that wasn't integrated. There were black kids in every school except maybe Aquinas. But
Yeah.
Catholic schools,
That's
parochial
right.
schools, all the city schools were integrated. My nephew lived on Amherst on the Hilltop, and didn't know 2 of the guys that lived on the street over him because he was bused
Yeah.
to East.
So even before integration,
Right.
As a part of integration.
as a part,
Part of integration.
Okay.
Right.
That they are okay. So, and you're saying, I mean, that broke. You know, you're now going to school way across town, being bused way across town, and that breaking up that central.
You know, we used to walk. I mean, when I was a little guy going to Bethany Presbyterian, we lived on St. Clair, and we walked right over to Garfield to go to church or Sunday school. And then when we moved to the East Side, and you know, if my mother wasn't going to church or something, then I would walk to Oakley Avenue Baptist Church. And everybody, there were 4 churches. There was 3. There was Oakley, Wheatland Methodist, which is now Hilltop Community.
That's right. Yeah.
And then there was Wayne Avenue Church of God. And those were the 3 black churches on the west side. And now you've got the new one that's down there at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah. Right. What's the name of that church?
And I mean, but now all the churches except for Hilltop Methodist have moved out of there, and well, Second Community is still there. But you know, it was you had a consortium of kids that grew up in the neighborhood, and even some that would come from other neighborhoods that their parents were
That's right.
attending those churches. Then you had that camaraderie. But now you don't see that anymore
Don't see
that
it.
much.
So let me ask you this, and this is a question I think for everyone here. Are we farther along from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s to now? Are we farther along? And what can we do that you see from your eyes to make things better, or to take that next step? Because I know we talk about the young people not having potentially the mentors, and so what does that look like for each one? And I'll start to the left, and we'll come. Well, no, let me start on this. Let me
Okay.
do Queen Mother Anne first, and then we'll come around.
Okay.
Sometimes it's so painful being the oldest. What I see is that we are not willing to let young people move in their own way. We want them to do it the way we did it. I see it not only in community organizations, I see it particularly in the churches, and the churches are losing members because they're not willing to let young people make their own decisions and decide that this is how we're going to do. Now, this doesn't say that we haven't made strides. Yes, we have. But we can make more, we can have more to show for the hard work that we put into the civil rights movement if we were willing to let young people make their decisions.
Yes, thank you. Young people make decisions. Ms. Boyd.
I think there are some young people who belong to certain groups who understand that they have to be good strategists and they have to be consistent and you can't quit. Okay?
Yeah, you really can't.
You just can't quit. They have not seen enough examples of us doing good trouble. Okay?
You're right.
Which is why I'm always going back to the whole Voting Rights Act and plan to do some work with some young people just on that issue. Just on that issue. Yes, we have made some strides because some people died, and some other people who had integrity at the time addressed certain things. And now we seem to be going back. The people who are supposed to be the ones that we trust in the Supreme Court, the Congress, Senate, nationally and locally, it's like just a game to see how many points I can make and how rich I can get while I'm doing this. And so we don't see the integrity that we once saw, even when we had to argue with people. Okay, the integrity is not there, and that does bother me.
Yeah.
I think it is time for us seniors to call together the Black Lives Matter local groups and say, what do we need to do to help you?
Okay. All right. Turn to the side.
Well,
Mike?
I've seen a lot in actually, I think the political structure that we have, and when I was in the labor movement and I was in D.C., I was there for almost 7 years. I saw the kind of political things that were not the truth.
Okay.
And now I see young people that don't have the opportunities because of the structure of the political structure in particularly this city, Columbus. Those things for young people have been taken away. I mean, the recreation centers, the places that they can go and congregate and have fun, and like dances. I mean, we always had some place to go. We go to Beatty Center on a certain night. We go to Glenwood Center on a night. We go to the Masonic Temple, or we go to the Lincoln Ballroom. And those were places where kids from all the black communities in the city of Columbus, teenagers, would come and participate because that's the only place we had to go. And I think the things that's happened now is that we haven't educated our young people enough to the political structure, the things that are the things that have been taken away from them, the opportunities that many of us had as youngsters that they don't have anymore. And I think a lot of that has to do with social media. I think social media has done a big injustice to young people. People on YouTube and Facebook and all these things, these young kids are committing suicide because people are teasing them. When I was a kid growing up, there's the thing that we call signifying, right?
Right.
I mean, signifying.
Okay.
We talk about each other's mother or somebody else, and
That's right.
and most of the guys that was in the group that I circled with, they wouldn't call you by your name; they call you by your mother's name.
Right.
It's like I see Jeff Cheap from across the street, and I say, "Hey, Roxy, how you doing?" Right? And he said, "Good, Frida. It's all right." Those are the kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that structure the community, along with a learning process
That's right.
of the ethics of having good work ethics. They don't have that anymore. They've taken that away from not only black kids, but from young people as a
General,
whole.
yeah, as a
And,
whole.
and more so by black kids. I mean, you know, the redlining that happened in this city. You know, when my dad bought the house on the hilltop, he had to go to Johnstown to get a loan.
Yep.
He couldn't get a loan from the Bank Ohio, which is national city, and you know, it went through several transitions. But and I mean, with leaders that we had, Mother Walker, man, God love her. She has been an inspiration to a lot of people, and particularly to me because I met her when I was like 5 years old, 6 years old, and you know these people that are now reaching out to the community, they need some structure. They need to have the kind of sincerity about reaching some of these kids. Man, these kids are killing each other right and left.
And I hear, you know, because I've heard about structure and commitment, you know, don't stop, right? Keep pushing forward. All right, sir.
All right.
Tom?
Let me preface by saying we, black folks, are an amazing people. You understand that we were in chains? You understand that?
Right.
That we were oppressed? That we had no advocate except ourselves? You realize how powerful that is? And you look at where we are now, and you can't fall on your knees and thank God Almighty for bringing us this far? Let me tell you, I see young folks, and you know what I call them? And Mike sees me do it all the time. I call them the fruit of the revolution. I tell them all the time, I said, I don't know what you're working on, but I'm going to tell you, we did our part to get you where you are now. It's your job to pick it up and take it from here. And they say, well, what should I do? I said, you figured it out. You figured it out. We did. You figured it out. Huh? The other piece is, we have always been oppressed. Now, before it was slavery, now it's guns, drugs, and fentanyl.
Yes.
And they send that to kill us. And it's been consistent
Yes, it
over
has.
time. But you know what? I know they have to be amazed because they say, these guys are worse than roaches. You can't get rid of them.
They keep coming.
They keep, like catfish, they keep coming.
Right.
Huh? I mean, you get 4 or 5 of them. So my whole thing is I'm very, very hopeful in terms of young folks because they'll struggle through it. And I know it's bad, and I'm not saying it's good. It is bad, but it's been bad for us a lot of times.
Sure.
And the thing that's amazing about us is how we can turn bad into good, and we do. And think of matter of fact, we saw that the lady that was admitted to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
I wept watching that on television.
Yeah.
So her ancestors were slaves. The person she married, right, was a slaveholder.
Yeah.
I weep when I saw that because of that woman to get there and to see her on TV
Yes.
and to see her acting as my grandmother, as my auntie, as my cousin, as the lady across the street. And let me just say this last thing about folks, about us as a people. Our women are our backbone. They will save and have saved this country and will do it because they're not afraid. And you look at the vice president, you look at them everywhere you see us. We are absolutely an amazing people. My last piece is this. The most dangerous people in Columbus during the 50s, right, was Jack and Jill. Those ladies were something. Those women were something. They took no stuff from nobody. And like Rita said, they never cussed.
Yeah, right.
Nope.
They never cussed. They never swore.
They didn't have
They were
to.
always dressed appropriately, very polite. But they raised, right, a whole nother realm, a whole nother level of people with a sense of confidence and attitude, right, that you couldn't do. The old Jewish saying is this: if you want to strengthen your culture or change it, have the women do it. The women will do it. Men won't change the culture, and the women keep us moving forward now, and will keep us moving forward in the future, no matter how tough things look. Just remember, we are an amazing people, blessed beyond belief. around the world doesn't understand who we are or what we are, and I think that's my hope for the future for the young folk. That's my rant. That's my rant for the day.
Just to add to what Tom said, it's like things that were taken away that we had the ability to reach out and grasp young people was Kamako, Model Cities, those programs that institute learning processes, work ethics, all the things that we're doing, and they were becoming so forceful
Yes.
that the county 648 board and the union that I work for, we fought them for a whole year
Right.
to keep that funding there, and we succeeded for 1 year, and the next year they wiped it out. And these organizations went away. And the only thing that remains now is some of the skeletons that were there that are still advocating for these kinds of things. Urban League does what was Urban League founded? Who was founded the Urban League? You know, we give onus to things that were detrimental to us in the beginning. So now, I mean, it's just becoming, they get millions of dollars, but can they reach as many people as 3 organizations could? No, they can't. So our young kids are going and doing without any leadership unless they begin to look for the kinds of groups like the Young Scholars programs, Ray Miller's school. You know, these kinds of things are important now to the older people to look back and say, hey, what can we do to bring these back? How can we get funding for these kinds of things? We talk about education, but education is so expensive now that the majority of young black kids can't go to college. They can't afford it.
Too expensive.
And I mean, come on, man. Just like, don't get me started. I get on my soapbox because,
Right.
you know, the thing about child care. How can a mother of 2 kids and a father of 2 kids work for $15 an hour and support daycare for their for their children?
You can't do it.
And buy pay for a car, pay for your rent, or buy a house? They can't do it. It's impossible.
Just can't do it.
Yeah.
And I think the larger question is, why is renting an apartment on a monthly basis more expensive than buying a house?
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and so
That's
that's
what
a
we
whole
are.
nother conversation
Yes,
on
it
affordable
is.
housing, right?
Yes.
So you know, I know we're running out of time, but I tell you, this has been an amazing conversation. We'll probably have to come back together again. I can bet because and let me just say this. You know, when we talk about the Thursday noon lunch club, this is what happens.
Yeah.
These are amazing conversations on history, topics, current events, all that is going on that impacts the city of Columbus and the region. And so we might not solve the world's problems, but this is where we can have a conversation in a space where there is spirited conversation. But it's the opportunity to really learn from the past and know where we're going in the future. So you might see part 2 of this, of this conversation of the Thursday Noon Luncheon Club. Thanks for being here.